Hello and welcome to our next episode of CJAD 6301 Crime and Criminal Justice. This week you have your first part of your research project is going to be due, and that is the discussion forum. And within this discussion forum, what I'm wanting you to do, what I need you to do, is to give me a couple paragraphs of what you are going to study, why you think that this is necessary or important, and why should I be interested. And then, you know, that's about all the detail that you need to put into it. Why is it important? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to me? And what is it? But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the process of this project. If this was an undergraduate class, you would write a literature review, you do a research paper on a specific single theory. And you turn it in and I'd be happy and everybody would get good grades, and the streets are paved with cheese and all of the fun stuff that comes along with making good grades. This is a graduate course, and I'm not your typical graduate professor because everyone in this program is either in the career field or they desire to become part of the career field. And because this is the criminal justice administration degree, there's a heavy emphasis on administration. And that's going to go with the theories class as well. The theories class is important so that you, as a student, as a practitioner of criminal justice, has an idea of why people do the things that they do, and they choose the things that they choose. Over the next 7 weeks, we are going to discuss different theories and how those different theories apply and approach. I know this week we had 103 comments in the discussion forum. I could not be more pleased. I threw some wrenches at you. I asked some questions to hopefully make you think outside the box. I specifically enjoyed my discussion with a few of you on forced sterilization and Buckfeed Bell and Strickler case, and how sterilization may or may not be a good tool for the future. But it made for a good discussion. I'm really proud of the work that you guys, all of you, did in the discussion forums. Keep up this level of good work for the next 8 weeks, and we'll be really pleased. But back to the research project. What I want you to do is and if you've taken CJAD 6310 with Dr. McMichael, there should have been a section in there about SARA. SARA is an acronym about problem-oriented policing. It is how we, as criminal justice practitioners, it's the accepted manner of evaluating and assessing problems and creating responses. So SARA is an acronym for S, scanning, A, analysis, R, response, and A, assessment. And this is what I want you to do with your research paper. Okay, so I want you to scan for a problem. I want you to find a crime problem or a deviance problem. If you are a police officer, I would like you to choose a street crime. If you work for the Secret Service or you do white collar crime analysis, go ahead and pick one of those. Just identify a recurring problem within your department. If you work in probation, juvenile probation, or adult probation, what are some of the most recurring problems that your clients have? If you're working in the prison, what is the recurring crime or the reoccurring violation that you find within the prison? And If you don't have that experience yet, pick where you want to go. If you want to go law enforcement, you want to go courts and community corrections. If you want to go institutional corrections, if you want to go to nonprofit and non-governmental agencies like halfway houses and rehabilitation centers, or working for Hope Haven, working for the sexual assault and domestic violence places here in town or wherever you live, pick something that you would be interested in and tell me about that problem. Okay, so for the paper, you're going to have 4 sections of this paper. First is scanning. You're going to identify the problem. You're going to identify the consequences of the problem for the community and to the agency that you work for. Okay, you're going to have to justify prioritizing the problem. Why is this problem? Why does this problem need to be addressed over the other problems? Okay. You also want to develop the goals. What kind of goals do you want to achieve? We want a 15% decrease in human trafficking or in prostitution within the city limits. We want to decrease drug use on campus by 60%. Then you're going to need to confirm that the problem exists. So contact your records department and or send in a FOIA request. Hopefully, it won't take that long to figure it out. You want to determine the frequency of the problem. Then you want to select the problems for identify why you want to pursue this particular issue. Then you get to the analysis, and this is where your theory is going to come in. Okay, I want you to choose 1 or 2 theories that we're going to be covering and use that as a basis for your analysis of this crime and why this crime exists. Okay, you want to identify and understanding the conditions of the problem. Why does it exist? What is the theory? What is the theory of deviance, the criminality theory, the crime theory that links to your topic? Okay, you want to find relevant data, so you'll want to do a library search for scholarly items. You will want to go to databases like the Washington Post has a database on the use of fatal force. You can contact the local police departments or probation departments. You can contact them, you can call them, you can tell them what you're doing and that you need some help to find out everything that you can find out about the problem. And then you also want to find out what policies have already been done, what has already been tried. And you can do this through, you don't need to call the police departments, you don't need to contact or ask the police departments about what they've done to address this. Just do a scholarly search through the library, do an internet search. What have police done to address violent gun crimes or whatever, and find out what hasn't been done. Okay, so then you want to identify the available resources and what can be done to develop a deeper understanding. And then I want you to create a response. I want you to create a policy. How is your department, how is your agency going to address this issue? What kind of policies are they going to implement to try and reach your goals that you put in part 1? Okay. Outline your response plan, state the specific objectives for the plan, and then, if this was in real world, you would carry out those planned activities. This is academia, so we're not going to be able to act out your plan unless you're working on this program. If you are currently actively working in the field, you can get with your boss and say, hey, I'm working on this policy project. Um, I'd like to carry it out. I'd like to implement this. But part 4 is the assessment. And any assessment is going to take at least 6 months. So you're not going to be able to assess it today. What I'd like you to do is to create your assessment plan. Part 4 will be how you plan to assess or to determine whether or not A, the plan was implemented, or B, how well it worked, whether using qualitative or quantitative data to determine whether or not this plan, this response plan that you have established has actually worked. And then make any, you're not gonna be able to do this again because you're not gonna have these results, but what kind of changes or what kind of modifications need to be made to your plan? How would you go about implementing or making those changes? I'd like you to put all of that into this response paper. But in part 2, in your analysis, is where your crime theory is going to be, because we're trying to analyze the problem, we're trying to assess the problem, and we want to use the theory of why people do the things that they do in that assessment or in that analysis. Okay, so if you have any questions about the paper, you're free to go to Ask the Prof. You can ask them in the discussion forum in the Falcon's Nest Cafe, or you can just ask them below here. Okay, so let's move on to this week academically. This week academically, we are discussing victimology. Okay, so within the mindset of victimology, Module 2, you again, this week's assignments is the discussion, the essay, and the final project discussion. But this week's discussion is crime is an activity where there's always a victim. Okay, whether the crime is violent crime, property crime, or even what they call victimless crime, there is always a victim. Explain how offenders select their victims. Discuss victimology as a tool for solving crime. Okay. Then there is this week's essay. This week's essay is explain how victim services work at each level of criminal justice: enforcement, courts, corrections, probation, parole. Okay. You will be required to research this topic outside the provided readings, outside the lectures, and the YouTube videos that I have provided for this particular week. And just based on those 2 assignments, you understand that there's 2 sets of victimology that we deal with. The first one is victim services. Well, the first one is how criminals pick victims. And this is something that we work on. Victimology can be traced back to the ancient societies. It's connected to a notion of sacrifice. A victim is a person or an animal who is the subject of a criminal action. Historically, they were a person or an animal who was put to death during a religious ceremony. Okay. But victims today are individuals who have suffered loss or hardship through accidents, natural disaster, disease, social problems, welfare, discrimination, violent crime. These victims have been subject to some kind of event in their life. Victimologists are going to investigate the victim's plight. And this is the part about victim services. This is actually the second part of victim services or victimology. And we study We investigate the impact of the injuries and losses upon people. You know, did they have a prior relationship with the suspect? Is there dealings between the suspects and the victims? And one of the videos, one of the YouTube videos that you're going to be watching and one of the articles you're going to be reading is about victim precipitation, how the actions of the victim caused the criminal act. I know that's not an excuse. Well, if she didn't dress that way, I wouldn't rape her. That's not an excuse. But we still look at those things. We look at that, you know, when we're looking for a criminal. Back to the first one, how do criminals, because we can use victimology to help identify the criminal. Okay, so what are the things that the victims have in common? And when we find what the victims have in common, then we can narrow down our insight. We can narrow down our views as to who or who is committing these particular crimes. Okay, so these two distinct points of views, or these two aspects, diverge. Okay, they are very distinct. The Uniform Crime Report and the Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey are two ways that we track these things. Okay? They don't closely focus upon the illegal activities, therefore they cannot provide any official counts or rates when we're dealing with victimology. But we can, if we are a profiler, or if we're wanting to establish a victim profile for a serial offender. You know, we look at some of those things that are common amongst the victims. And when we're looking at those common elements or those common threads, themes, sounds like a research project, doesn't it? Did you know that investigations is research? Okay. It's qualitative research, it's statistical research. Okay. And we use victimology as that tool to identify possible offenders of the particular crimes. You know, we want to ask questions like, is this a serial? You know, are there common elements found in the crime scene on the victim? Does the victim know the offender? You know, that's one of the things, and we've got several police officers in this class this week, so they can discuss this. And you know I used to own this pickup truck. It was a 1978 Chevy Silverado pickup truck. My son got into an accident, and I had it rebuilt and restored, and I painted it periwinkle purple with yellow trim. Back when football was still a sport and not a political commentary, I was a Minnesota Vikings fan. Well, on Christmas Day a few years ago, back while I was still living in Big Spring, somebody painted all over my truck. And I called the police on Christmas Day. And of course, no police officer wants to come out to do a vandalism complaint on Christmas Day. And they'd much rather be with their family or, you know, hanging out, being on call, or doing whatever you guys do on Christmas Day. I know when I drive around on Christmas Day, I don't see a whole lot of police officers around. So I think that they're all on call working out of the house on that particular day. This guy shows up and his first question out of his mouth was, do you know who did this? No. He goes, how do you expect it to be solved? Yeah, it really hurt my feelings, but there were a lot of cars up and down the street and within the neighborhood that were also vandalized and painted on. And they looked at all the common things and the people, you know, it was all pickup trucks. It was all older pickup trucks. They were all trucks with a paint scheme. They weren't just your basic vehicles that you saw or that you could buy at the Ford dealership. Okay. So, you know, victim profiling can be defined as a set of approaches and techniques that are used to predict the characteristics of an unidentified offender through investigating and analyzing the evidence obtained from the scene of the crime. Okay, by analyzing the scene of the crime, an investigator can understand the personality, the demographics, and the behavioral characteristics of an offender. The characteristics obtained from the crime scene can also be used to identify the behavior patterns of an unknown offender. Okay, so the real process of victim profiling may differ from one investigator to the next, depending on the level of training and what they're understanding and what they're actually looking for. And the aim of this process will still remain the same, which is to deduce the personality and physical and behavioral characteristics, not the victim, but of the perpetrator. Because the perpetrator is who's giving us this information, who is telling us what is actually going on in the world. Okay. Victim profiling generally determines the cause and the effect relationships between the scene of a crime, the victim witnesses, and the offender. Okay. We learned a lot of this victim profiling from Gary Ridgway, from Ted Bundy, from Edward Kemper, from serial rapists. There are certain things this serial rapist is going to look at and find. And what we have found through victimology is that victims will be re-victimized. And I was talking to a serial rapist when I was working at the Eden Detention Center. Believe it or not, he was. Back up a second. At the Eden Detention Center, it was a private facility owned by Corrections Corporation of America. That prison is now owned by Core Civic, and I think it's the same company. They just changed names. But everybody that was in my prison, there were 1,300 inmates in my prison, and all of them, every one of them was being deported from this country. They were not citizens. They could have been here legally. They could have been here illegally, but they were not citizens. And they committed a felony within the United States. And committing a felony within the United States is a crime for an immigrant to commit a felony inside the United States is an additional crime in itself. And then they get sentenced for up to 5 years in prison, and then they're deported. So I normally worked D unit, which was the special populations unit. It was next door to the solitary confinement and to the special housing unit, single cell, 24 hours a day. I was in the D unit. It was also a special populations unit, but it was a pod. It had 47 beds, and they were allowed to, these offenders were allowed to pedestrian, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but they were allowed to go to the chow hall. They were allowed to go to the activity center. They were allowed to go to the work center. They could go to the yard and they could lift weights and play soccer or softball or football or baseball or whatever they wanted to do. But they were, we called them a special population unit. Everybody there had been convicted of an aggravated offense. Not just robbery or murder or drugs or whatever. It was a special aggravated offense: aggravated robbery, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, aggravated molestation. There were aggravated cases. So I got to, I'm in there every day. So I got to get to know a lot of these men. And anecdotally, it wasn't a real research project, but I'd ask them, because I was going to school. And I would ask them, not officially, because you can't do official research without actually getting permission from the prison system to do that. And a private prison's never going to give you permission to do research on their inmates. I'd ask, this rapist, how did you pick the women that you were going to rape? And he said, well, I picked the women that have a low self-esteem. I go, well, how can you tell they have a low self-esteem? He goes, well, they stay by themselves. They don't make eye contact with people. Their eyes are always downcast. They will avoid conversations and discussions with people. And I taught, and then I went and read articles, and everything he said was confirmed with the literature. But victims tend to be re-victimized. Okay. And so the offenders are going to look for the same type of the same characteristics within their victims. You know, the profile can play a big role in assisting police in their investigations and how to find the offender. Some of the problems with victim profiling is that people question the scientific validity of an offender's victim profile because it's seen that it's hugely based on guesswork. Well, let you in on a little secret. Every profile is based on guesswork. Granted, it's educated guesswork. I have the statistics. I have this information to back me up. I have this anecdotal information to back me up. But a problem is that overgeneralizations and stereotyping can also impact the effectiveness of the victim profile technique. You know, there's a lack of adequate data. There's always a lack of adequate data. In the, because we're looking at case studies, and that would probably be the best way to go about conducting a victim profile, is looking at a case study. Okay, and so we have this offense, and we see these things, and we identify these patterns within this crime, and then we want to go look at other open cases that share similarities. Okay, so the other is victim services. Victim services is a idea to help the victims to overcome, okay, so that we can stop calling them victims and start calling them survivors. I am not a victim of COVID. I'm a survivor of COVID. Okay. I contracted COVID twice myself. Both of my in-laws died in January. Many of you were in my class in January when that happened. On January 23rd, my father-in-law died. January 24th, my mother-in-law died. And yeah, but I'm a survivor. I'm not a victim. Even though that, rape victims, we need to help within victim services. We need to help our rape victims become rape survivors to where they're empowered. Because if we keep them within this victim mentality, it's going to hurt their self-esteem, and then they're going to be targeted for additional rape. Or at least that's what the research and the studies show. Okay, so I think that's going to be about it. We're at 30 minutes. I'll see you guys in the forums this week. Keep up the great work with the forums. I was extremely impressed with the work that you guys did with this week's discussion on crime and criminality. And I hope to have a whole lot more really good discussions. If you have any questions about your research project, I am in my office every day, Monday through Friday from 9 to noon, except next Monday. Even next Monday's video will not be completed until probably sometime Tuesday afternoon, unless I come up here on Sunday to do it, because I have to go to Abilene for court. I have a court date. Well, my wife has a court date. She's the executor of my in-laws' will, and they're probating everything next Monday. So don't expect next Monday's video to be conducted on Monday, unless it's really late Monday evening, but probably expect it sometime Tuesday afternoon. With that, I will see you guys in the forums. Have a good day.